Hey everybody, it's Jack Reed with Future Pastimes, and in this video I want to talk about the feasibility of playing Dune at two players. Now, if you look at the box, it does state 2 to 6 players. Um, so, theoretically, supposedly, ostensibly, this can be played as a two-player game. But the reality is that it really can't be played at two players. I mean, yes, technically, you can play it as a two-player game, but you really can't enjoy it at two players. It's really not meant to be played at two players. 3 players, yes. I absolutely think you can play this as a three-player game. And the original designers, and there were 3 of them, they played it at 3P quite a bit. Now, they only played basic because back in the Avalon Hill days, basic was the rule set. There was only basic. There were some optional rules that you could fold in. And in the 2019 edition, everything was given a new moniker. The rules were now the basic rules, and the optional rules were now the advanced rules. And I know that a lot of people, and I would consider myself one of them, feel like the double rule set is not optimal. And I wish that there was only one rule set. I don't mind the idea of there being variants. Variance, I think, helps people to manage their expectations and to zero in on a single rule set, and then you can play around with that rule set. But it gives the fan base as a whole common denominator. In any case, getting back to enjoying this game at a low player count, it's certainly possible. And I don't necessarily think that if you are playing this as a 3 player or a 4 player game, that you have to stick to the basic rules. It's certainly possible to have the advanced rules in, but for me, it feels more logical to stick to the basic rules at the low player count, certainly for 3 or 4 players. Now, if you are playing at 5 players, I would recommend that you have the Nexus cards, and they're in this box here. Here we go. This really makes 5 player games work better because prior to the advent of the Nexus cards, the main problem you had with a 5 player game was that when a Nexus does occur and you have alliances, you're going to have one player who, at least, who's going to be left out in the cold. No one with them for them to ally with. And so you get this consolation prize of if there are alliances, anybody not an alliance gets to draw a Nexus card. So it's certainly not at the same value, the same potential value of having an ally, since it is a one-shot effect. And you can get another card or exchange the card you do have if there's another Nexus, but there's no guarantee when that is going to occur. But it is an incentive for somebody to go it alone in a single player. So even if you don't have an odd number, sometimes there is value in simply just not getting into an alliance. And especially if you're like, all right, I'm getting into an alliance, but it feels like it's going to be a one-sided alliance where I'm not really getting nearly as much out of it as the other player is getting, depending on who that ally is. So the Nexus card may be another reason for you to say, you know what, I don't want that alliance. And I would still use Nexus cards if I were playing at 3 players or 4 players, and why not? But and you can use them in basic. They're certainly slightly better in advanced, but and that's because one of the reasons that is if for a couple of them, if you draw your own Nexus card, so if you're the Emperor and you draw the Emperor card, you're only using the cunning advantage here, which, as you can see, this one is count 5 of your forces as Sardaukar. That's an advanced advantage. Doesn't make sense, but there is a rule where if you draw your own card, you can immediately discard it and draw again. So, and that rule existed specifically for when you're playing basic because this would not be applicable. But it's still, you can use that same rule in advanced. So back to 2 players. One of the main issues with 2-player Dune is that with the 5 strongholds, it's really hard to. You can't do any stronghold blocking at all. Um, and it's just too easy for somebody to sneak in and get the win. So it takes a lot of the surprise out of it. I'm going to get back to this here in just a moment. One of the other main reasons, though, that two player is just not a very satisfying experience is because Dune is a very social game. It is a game of conquest, diplomacy, and betrayal. And that diplomacy, I think, is a critical element. And that comes in several forms, but one of them is just negotiating with the other players to do things for you or against somebody else. And that social aspect is largely missing if you're just having two players. You could certainly bribe somebody. You could say, look, I'm going to bribe you to not go for the win right now, but that doesn't seem particularly practical. So I don't see a lot of people doing that. At least with three players, you've got somebody is always on the outside, or can be. If it's me against the other player, there's a third player who may work with me against this third player if they're a threat. And that jockeying a position, it does allow for some deals for stronghold blocking, for example, or look, this third player is going for the win, so we need to each do our part to prevent that from happening. And going it alone, there's just too much pressure. There's too much responsibility on one player. At least with two, it's split. So I'm not sure why the box reads 2 to 6 players. I would never recommend it to 2 players. I would say, look, if you want the Dune experience, but you're not able to get up to 6 players, you're not able to get up to 5 or even 4, and even 3 seems to be a bridge too far, then I would recommend that you look at the Dune Conquest. And this is a game for 2 to 4 players, and here the 2 was purposeful. This is a pretty good 2-player game, and one of the reasons for that is that the rules for 2-player has you eliminating one of the strongholds. It's done randomly, or you can just go ahead and decide. So with only 4 strongholds, it becomes a little bit more manageable for 2 players to jockey for position. And the other thing that's interesting about this is, of course, you can't win on turns 1 or 2. You can't start to win until turn 3. And then it only goes up to 5. So if nobody has won by the end of turn 5, it's going to be the player who has the most spice. So you really have 2 paths to victory. And you can go after both of them simultaneously. You can focus on one over the other. You have that flexibility. And this game plays quite well at 2 players. And it emulates much of the mechanical experience of Dune. The battle system is the same. The phases are very similar. So you've got the storm movement, you've got spice blows, you're getting cards, but there's no auction, so it's much faster and more streamlined. You have revival, you have shipping and movement, you have battle, you have spice gathering. There's no mentat pause because you don't really need to worry about that so much. You just go on to the next turn. And it has that same Dune feel to it, but streamlined, simplified. The base game, 4 factions. And at 2-player, you can have any combination of these, and you can even use the specially designed 2-player double factions, where it's the Atreides and Fremen, all of their advantages combined, versus the Harkonnen Imperium with their advantages combined, and this plays really well. But you can actually do that with any combination of these 2, and certain rules that we put into place, like you're going to have more leaders overall if Atreides is part of the double because they have 7 instead of 5. And if Fremen is part of it, you're going to be using the Fremen shipping rules. irrespective of what your combination is. So it's always going to be start with 5 in there, and then you always bring in 5. Um, you're doing a random mix of the leaders, 5 random leaders out of the 2 factions, 7 if Atreides is one of the factions involved, because that is one of their advantages. And everyone has the same revival. You will have the starting spice of whichever one is lower, if I remember correctly. So that is my suggestion if a 2-player Dune experience is something that you're anticipating. Or you're just like, I don't think I can regularly get the same number of people for full-on Dune. Because most of the Dune community will agree that Dune shines best at 6 players. And in fact, there are some who will try to push that to even a higher player count. I've played it with 9 players. 9 is really pushing it. I don't enjoy 9 nearly as much as I do 6. I think 7 or 8 works fine. There are some little tweaks to the rules that you would probably want to incorporate to just make it make the more sense and to not drag it out so super long. But as I said, 6 players is the sweet spot, and lower player counts is a little bit lesser of an experience. So certainly playing 2. Now, that said, do you still want to try to play Dune at 2P? I would recommend having some house rule about eliminating one of these strongholds. It just then counts as a desert territory with no special characteristics. So if Carthage is removed, it's just a desert space. There's no extra collection. There's no ornithopters. And so that will help make the game more manageable. But it does not get a strong recommendation from me. It doesn't even get a very weak recommendation. I would say don't play this game at 2 players. Find somebody else to get into that game and do your best. Let me know in the comments if you have attempted Dune at a 2-player count. What did you do? How did it work out for you? How enjoyable of an experience was it? And also let me know your thoughts on playing it at other player counts lower than 6. As I mentioned, I've played this at lower player counts. We've been playing it a lot more at 5 because of the Nexus cards. With 4, it's still good. I think it's good to teach. If I only have four players between us and somebody is new, and if they want to jump into Dune, I think you can do it. I think it's still pretty enjoyable. We probably would stick to the basic rules. We may still use the Nexus cards, though, because I like having those in there. So there you have it. That's it for this one, everyone. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again soon.